Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers. In keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, we ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life in recovery. This is the fifth session of the sixth cycle of the workshop that was presented on May 25th, 2024, where we completed the fears inventory portion of step 4. Next week, we'll continue with step 4 and begin the harms inventory. If you would like to contribute to the seventh tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Where we start is in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And always remember, understanding what the Big Book is basically the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our life unmanageable. The main thing about this is remembering that merely reading the Big Book without experiencing it is not useful. You can't learn to swim or do anything by just reading the instructions. In order to learn to swim, you have to jump in the water. In order to learn how to play the piano, you have to practice. You can't just read the instructions. And that's one of the things that we need to be aware of in just reading the book and not applying it. Yeah, we're getting a lot of really good information, but we're going into the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when we get to the cover page of the Big Book states that the Big Book is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And we refer to the term recovered because that's what it says in the book. I don't get involved in the semantics of whether it's we're recovering or we're recovered. The book says recovered, so that's good enough for me. I use the term recovered. The definition of recovered means that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice whether I drink or not because I don't think about it. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. Alcohol is no longer an option to solve any of my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful, and my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. So the old ways are gone, new ways have come in. And the next thing I look at is the 10th step promise, which is on page 84 of the big book. This has become a way of life. And it states, we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We'll see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We haven't even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react, so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Then we look at page 27 of the big book, which defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. And then additionally, we look in the appendix where it talks about the spiritual experience. It describes recovered as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then we look at the foreword to the first edition, which states, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So other alcoholics, precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. It later goes on to say the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. And the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So we understand, number one, and when we say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking, that's the self-awareness that I know I'm an alcoholic, but it's not enough to just stop drinking. That self-awareness is not enough to be being sober and becoming recovered. Only thing that self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. And that's the first step. That's what we've done. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. We're at the first step. And that's the self-knowledge. And then that self-knowledge is that as a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take one drink without being physically driven to take one after the other. This then allows me, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on the first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power. So then I have to have that conception of a higher power, which brings us to step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the only thing we did a lot of activities around solidifying our own sense of who that higher power is to us. And the only requirement for step 2 is to answer yes to this question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If I answer yes to that, then the next step is step 3. Made a decision. Step 3 is only a decision. I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. It's just the decision. This is where a lot of people kind of get confused, and they think that they're turning their will and their life over to the care of God in step 3. No, we just made a decision to do it. It's basically just the decision. And this is the 3rd step prayer, where we're saying, I'm offering myself to God to do his will with me. And I'm saying, okay, I'm ready to do what it is that I need to do, where it talks about relieve me of the bondage of self, that bondage of self. And I like to use the image of, I always thought of this, but I never really described it before. When I think about what is the bondage of self, I always think of the movie A Christmas Carol, where Jacob Marley comes to Scrooge, and he's got all of these chains wrapped around him, and connected to these chains are all these money boxes that they had back in the day. And he said that he built that chain during his life, link by link. And that's what our character defects do to us. The chains, and I like to think of the image of each one of those money boxes as another one of my character defects, where I see myself all bound up in that bondage of self. And now I'm making the decision in the 3rd step to allow God to break those chains. And that, where I start doing that, is when we get to the 4th step, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And last week we went into the 4th step. The 4th step consists of 4 separate inventories. There are 4 categories. The first category is our resentments, which is the biggie. We do a lot of work around the resentment inventory. We took practically an entire session last week just focused on the resentment inventory, because there's a lot more detail in the resentment inventory, because resentments, and Bill Wilson always talks about it, it's one of the biggies, all of these resentments that we have. So what we look at when it comes down to our inventories is, and this is from pages 64 and 65 of the big book, it states that in most cases it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we list opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And it comes down to looking at what is referred to as the parts of self. These parts of self, which is what it comes down to, of what gets interfered with, or gets hurt or wounded, are things like our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves, our pride, our pocketbook, our money, our finances, anything of a material nature, our emotional security, how safe we feel in the world, our ambitions, which are our plans for the future, both the immediate and down the road, and then our personal relations, how we interact with others, and then our sex relationships. And then we look at it even further. So we're looking at the parts of ourself, And next, we're looking at our behaviors. And this comes from page 67. We're looking at where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. And this boils down to 5 main character defects. And these 5 main character defects are: I'm selfish, I want what I want, and I want it done my way. I'm dishonest, I'm a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I'm self-seeking, I want more than I have right now. I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. And then we boiled it down even a little bit further, where these are the 5 main character defects. But then we looked at some other character defects, which kind of roll up to these main character defects to help us become more, help us become clearer on specifically what is it that we're doing. And this was where we looked at column 5 in the resentment inventory. Because we want to always look at what was it that I did. Did I do these things because I was selfish? Did I do them because I was dishonest? Was I self-seeking, frightened, or inconsiderate? And this is important because the big book lists things like mean, egotistical, indignant, self-pitying, self-centered, and self-delusional. But once we get to step 6 and 7, where we're not there yet, but we're preparing to get there. So we're doing the footwork here in step 4. The instructions for step 6 and 7 includes that we're ready to let God remove from us all of the things which we have admitted are objectionable, and every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to God, to you, which is God, and my fellows. So while every character defect falls within the major 5 or a combination of them, it's better to be more specific. So for example, people pleasing is really being dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened all at the same time. But people pleasing gives a more accurate description rather of what I'm actually doing. So in preparing us to get to the fears inventory, we have to remember that we repeat what we don't repair. The same situations will repeat themselves because your character defects come into play in the same way, time after time after time. And we continue to be unhappy and wonder, why me? Why does this always happen to me again? The faces change, but the situation's always the same. And this happens again and again because our character defects come into play. And we continue to be unhappy because we're doing the same thing. We're still acting out those same character defects. And remember, it's not the person that we listed in the first column of our resentment inventory, which causes our unhappiness, but our character defects, which come into play. So as we get into step 7, the character defects start to diminish, and then in step 10, they can be removed. And as a result, the problems caused by them vanish. Which now brings us, we prepared ourselves to get to the fear inventory. Now, we are only born with 2 fears: fear of loud noises and fear of falling. Every other fear is learned based on either we're afraid we're not going to get something we think we deserve, or we're afraid we're going to lose something we already have. Now, when we look at page 68 in the big book, it states that we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. Even though we had no resentment in connection with them, we asked ourselves why we had them. Perhaps there's a better way, which is where we look at column 4 of the fear inventory. And this is what the fear inventory looks like. And in the fear inventory, I'm really narrowing it down. See, the key part of the resentment inventory was that we got to see that we're the cause of our unhappiness. The fear inventory is to see if there's footwork that we're capable of doing and to start doing these actions immediately so that we can stop being paralyzed by fear and controlled by people, places, and things. It's important to remember that God will only do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And column 4 of the fear inventory lists the things that we're capable of doing. So when we go back to the fear inventory, what we look at is in column 1, we write down a fear that we have. Now, the fear doesn't have to match what's in your resentment inventory, but it could. So, for example, if maybe I listed my son-in-law on my resentment list because he took a job in another state and was taking my daughter with him, my column 5 would have selfish, inconsiderate, and frightened listed. Because frightened is checked off, I would look at what I'm afraid of. And in this case, it might be afraid that I may never see my daughter and my grandchildren again. That fear would be listed on my fear inventory. So I listed a fear in column 1 of I'm afraid of not having enough money to pay my bills and that I might lose my house. So that then in column 2, I answer the question, why I have that particular fear. What's so scary about what's in column 1? Or what's the worst that could happen? And then you write your answer to that in column 2. Column 3 is pretty simple. And this is a little bit different than some of the other inventories that I've seen, but I like this one because it's very simple. And what I'm basically asking here is, do I realize that I'm relying on myself rather than my higher power? And all I do is check off yes or no. And then in column, and I forgot to click this, so you click yes or no. And then in column 4, this is where I list what measures I can take to prevent this fear from happening. So what footwork can I do? What are the things that I can do? So for the example, some of the things I can do if I'm suffering financially is maybe I can find better sources of income to increase cash flow, find a part-time job to supplement my income, develop and live on a stricter budget, maybe sell my house and find a cheaper place to live, all different things that I might be able to do. And then in column 5, this is where I go back to those specific character defects. And those character defects, what character defects are going to stop me from doing that? Am I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate, or from the list of other character defects, am I an approval seeker? Am I jealous? Am I lustful? Am I egotistical? Am I a troublemaker? Am I unethical? In this instance, I listed that I'm frightened, I'm an approval seeker, I'm a people pleaser, I'm a perfectionist, I'm selfish, and I'm a procrastinator because I don't want to have to deal with the things that are going on in my life. So this is the part of the fear inventory. It's very, very simple. You just want to list all of those fears, go back to your resentment inventory. If you had fearful checked off, then you would transfer that fear. You would transfer that to your fears inventory. So there might be some overlap there. But it's a very simple process in going through the fears inventory. It's just cut and dry. Sometimes we're just afraid to do the fears inventory. How many times have I heard someone say, I'm afraid to do my fourth step because I'm afraid of what I'm going to find. Well, once we do it, we find out, hey, it wasn't so bad, was it? Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's Prayer for Mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.